If I told you I was going to talk to the associate professor of sociology at Indiana University-Purdue in Indianapolis, and we're going to talk about the Association of Religion Data Archives, you'd be going, what?
What?
So he addresses it in the book. It turns out to be a delightful youngster.
Lovely.
Yeah, and I figured, well, it's got to be an old dude. He's got to be ancient. He's got to be Yoda-aged.
Yeah, just to know all this stuff.
So, but I had a chance to talk to him the other day, and he began by defining Christian nationalism.
Christian nationalism is a desire to see a very particular expression of Christianity privileged in the public sphere, and that the government would vigorously defend that expression of Christianity being privileged in the public sphere. So as we look across the U.S., there are lots of expressions of Christianity, but Christian nationalism is trying to say that this particularly conservative politically, culturally, it draws really stark ethno-racial boundaries around what it means to be an American, has a comfort with violence, all of these things that I think are cultural baggage that draws us away from the message and example of Jesus in the Gospels, that it's that expression of Christianity they want to see privileged. And so, yeah, the desire is to wrestle with that in this book.
We have a constitutional mandate to not do exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
Why is that not mattered on a larger scale to the churches who have become so extreme?
Yeah, well, I think some of it is due to the history of religion in the U.S. and the fact that those that were at the beginning drawing it up, they weren't particularly, some were Christian, many were deists, but they weren't particularly opposed or in support of any particular brand of Christianity. But because a majority of Americans were Christian, that really has flavored how religion operates in our country. And so over time, those groups that had greater access to privilege and power were able to essentially benefit their particular view. And so we see, again, this particular expression of Christianity gaining hold because it was intent on gaining privileged access to political and cultural power and then defending that access. So in doing that, they were able to make a way.
And not to be cynical, but there is a certain basis of cynicism in the entire movement when it goes in that direction and the direction that it has. Is this about money?
Yes, I think money always plays a big role in it. Who has access to economic power and can defend that access? And so in some ways, to make a really blunt point, there were folks that had to create theological explanations for why they could continue to enslave other human beings, right? If we look back in America's history. And so religion was used explicitly to support that economic framework. And religion was used by others to try to tear that framework down, right, and oppose slavery. But we can't ignore the fact that religion was and Christianity was used to support that. So by that example, and there are others, money and capital really are a part of this because power in many ways is money and money is power.
Sure. Yeah. Talking with Andrew L. Whitehead, American Idolatry is the book. So one of the great dangers that come from this is participation in the church, and specifically with younger Americans who have turned away from God and away from Christianity. One of the things they cite is the constant noise from far-right evangelicals and the damage that they are doing to the church and to that core system of belief. What do you want to say about that?
Yeah, I think that's a story that I hear too. Anecdotally, when I travel to college campuses or even in my own history, I was in high school a little over 20 years ago, so it's not that recent, but it's the same story where we were taught in church, and these kids that I interact with were taught, of loving our neighbor, defending those who are marginalized or who are weak, that these are the Christian principles. But then when they see those folks that have taught them that, when they see them then interact in the political sphere, they feel that there's a certain level of hypocrisy where now it isn't about trying to help marginalized or the oppressed. It's about protecting power, ensuring that we get the right people in power. And so they sense this disconnect. And so that has made them somewhat cynical, some leaving or some wanting to reform the church. And that was a part of my story too. But then when we look at data, we do see that there has been across the American public a backlash starting in the 1990s to a politicized Christianity and religion, where now we saw, in 1994, about 8 to 10% of Americans would say they were unaffiliated with a religious tradition. And nowadays it's, 25 to 30% of Americans are unaffiliated. And that has been a distinct trend that started based on this politicization of Christianity.
And before I let you go, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, and I'm the furthest thing from a biblical scholar, but doing kind of an interesting thing with my son who does know the Bible and knows it well. We're reading the Bible, and really for the first time in my life, through the Bible. And as you end where I am, as you get near the end of the Old Testament, it seems to me that this is likely one of the excuses that the most extreme members of the evangelical movement are using, is that God had a chosen people, and those chosen people he made sure were secured, sometimes in violent but always in very forceful ways. So therefore we're just doing God's work. Is that one of the excuses they're using? Because, by the way, for those of you not familiar with the Bible in any way, that's a complete nonsense line of thinking to what actually is stated in the Bible, regardless of what translation you may or may not believe in.
Yeah, no, I think, many Americans who embrace Christian nationalism, we find, do kind of imagine America, or at least the America that they believe or want to see come to fruition, as a mirror image or a type, just like the people of Israel. Many of them obviously know that the United States is not mentioned in the Bible, which of course it isn't, but they see it in that light. It's kind of a metaphor for what the U.S. could and should be. They believe the U.S. has a special place in God's plan for the world. And so in believing that, again, that can be used to baptize decisions that benefit Americans, maybe at the detriment of other countries, right? And we're going to use their resources or place them in a difficult position because we believe God has blessed us. And I think those are things we have to wrestle with as we're trying to be good citizens, not only in our country, but globally, as we're all more connected now anyways.
I just really like that guy. I mean, Professor Whitehead.
So smart.
And, IUPUI is not a thing anymore. Do you know that? IUPUI is going away? No. I just thought it was the coolest name for a college. Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. IUPUI. It's just PU now. Or I'm sorry, just IU.
IU.
Indiana University at Indianapolis.
I didn't know that.
So anyway, he's an associate professor of sociology there, and the book's called American Idolatry, and it's an easy read, and I think you ought to read it. If you're a Christian like I am and you're concerned. That's all.